cosplay tutorial. I've always loved thinking about the fact that there are other wizarding schools out there, and in the Goblet of Fire I was baffled by the Beauxbatons Academy of Magic. Yeah, I had a French phase back then that didn't exactly calm down my excitement. The uniforms were just so beautiful and I needed one. I did make one a few years back, but it was not up to my expectations, and so I wanted to make a better one. So I did. In this video I'll show you how to make every piece for the Beauxbatons uniform. Let's go! First thing, the dress. I had to look closely on photos and videos of it to make sure I had the right cut, and I think I managed to get it right. I drew up all the pieces on my fabric, and I pinned together the side pieces for the top of the dress first. Like that I could adjust the middle seams to be as tight as possible. Using an iron, I made a double folded edge on both of the front pieces. I only sewed down the side that will be underneath the other. Like that there will be no visible seam. I pinned the two sides together tight and added a sleeve as well. Now, to make it even more shaped, I pinned down a triangle on each side on the bottom half before sewing it in place. Turning it outside in, the seams will be like this. Then I finished adding the two sleeves. Next up, I sewed together the 5 skirt pieces, leaving the last seam for the zipper. I drew on the seam line for the skirt with a chalk. It's sort of a wavy line in the front. When all of this is sewn and adjusted, turn the dress inside out and make 4 stitches by hand on the front seam of the top to mark where the decoration buttons will go after. Now take an invisible zipper and measure it up on the back of the dress before you fasten it. Make sure the zipper goes past the tightest point on the waist or you'll have trouble putting it on. For the collar, I drew up the pattern on some masking tape and plastic wrap. Transfer this to the dress fabric and double it up before pinning together the edges. Sew it together and turn it inside out before ironing the edges flat, and make a seam along the inner edge. Pin the collar around the edge of the dress and sew it together. For the end of the sleeves, I doubled some grey fabric and some dark blue lace on top of the dress fabric. I pinned it together separately and turned it inside out like the collar and sewed it onto the sleeves. To decorate the front, I made some triangle buttons out of warbler. A simple triangle with a hole underneath to fasten it. Then I mixed a dark blue color using acrylic paints and painted the buttons with several layers. When they were dry, I sewed them to the dress where I've already made the marks. To finish off the dress, secure the seam edges on the bottom of the skirt. And that's first piece done! Next piece is the jacket. Using a light blue lining fabric for the inside and the same fabric as the dress for the outside, I made the 2 main pieces for the jacket. I then added a wide strip of the dress fabric all around the edge of the lining fabric, following the shape to make the inside of the jacket opening. Sew this strip to the lining fabric and pin it down to hold it in place. Time to add a front pocket with the logo. I cut out the size of my desired pocket with rounded edges, and I sewed it together using one side of lining fabric and the other side of dress fabric. I found a picture of the Beauxbatons logo and flipped it horizontally to make it mirrored. I bought some iron-on paper to print out the logo and cut as close as I could to the edge of the picture. Put this logo face towards the fabric and use the iron and press the motif on until it sticks. Then remove the back of the paper and continue ironing using a piece of parchment paper in between. Add a piece of dark blue ribbon on the top of the pocket and sew it down on the left side of the jacket. Time to combine the lining and the outside. Front side to front side, layer the two and pin together the edges up to where the collar around the neck begins and all the way around the bottom. Then sew it together. Next up, put together the collar piece and slide it in between the two jacket layers before sewing it together and securing the seams. To flip it inside out, use the opening by the sleeves. Then add the sleeves for the outside first and sew it together by using the opening on the inside. To sew the sleeves on the lining, I pulled the fabric pieces through the sleeve of the outside fabric, sewed the pieces together before pulling it back through the sleeves. Make sure the bottom of the sleeves have an opening and the bottom of the sleeves for the lining and outside are sewn together. On every single edge of the jacket, I added pieces of the dark blue ribbon and sewed it on, folding it over the edges. I pinned the front together to shape and marked where I wanted the button and buttonholes to go. I added 3 buttons on the side with the side pocket and the buttonholes accordingly on the other side. And that's it for the jacket. Now to the beautiful fancy shoes. I'm not exactly a shoemaker, so I got my hands on some secondhand Oxford shoes with small heels. The Oxford heels had the sort of laced pattern that I wanted. I put a ball of paper inside the shoes and some masking tape around the heels to protect it. Then I used some black plastic dip and covered the shoes entirely with 2 or 3 layers before leaving it to dry completely. Next, I took a piece of light colored pleather and measured it on the shoe lip where to insert the lace after, and also how to cut up the bottom. Using several layers of dark blue leather paint, I painted the pleather pieces and set them aside to dry. On the shoes themselves, I used the same dark blue leather paint and also a sky blue paint. I also painted the opposite color in the little holes of the lace. The front and the back of the heels are dark blue, and the rest of the shoe is sky blue. Then I used a clear varnish with a matte effect all over the shoes to dampen down the shine from the paint. Lastly, I sewed by hand the dark blue front pieces on the shoe lip before flipping it over and adding the shoelaces. I laced the shoes so the ends go through the 2 holes in the front piece, ending in a bow to tighten. Third piece finished. So I did the hat last because it quite literally scared me to do. Who would think that such an undetailed hat would take so much trying and failing? In the end, I went with the following technique. I wanted to try and make the hat base out of Worbla, which in the end didn't work out, but it still ended up being useful. Useful, but not necessary. I used a blue felt fabric for the hat. I soaked the fabric completely in some warm water and squeezed the water out as much as possible. I draped the fabric over the hat mold so that the only seam would be in the back, which I pinned down. I tied a little rope around the bottom of the hat and tightened it with a knot and let that sit until the fabric has completely dried. Then I remade the pattern from the hat, including the brim, out of foam. It took some trying and failing, but in the end I was sort of satisfied. I placed the hat on a styrofoam head and used a heat gun to shape it before taping it down to see how it would look. I then made some final adjustments using scissors. I placed the felt fabric on top of the foam and adjusted the pins. I sewed it together and made a second one to double the fabric. Like that I could put the foam hat in between the 2 layers. I also made a seam on the bottom to keep the foam inside. For the brim, I used a long strip of the felt fabric and folded it around the foam, pinning it as I went. For the end of the strip, I hand sewed the seam to keep it in place, as the foam is too thick to do it by machine. Finally, I sewed together the inner circle of the brim. I placed the brim around the hat and lined up the seams in the back before pinning the inner circles together. The 4 layers of felt was too thick for my sewing machine to handle, so I ended up doing the seam by hand as neat as I could. Lastly, shape the brim in a diagonal shape, and you're done. So there you go, a 3-piece Beauxbatons uniform to stride down the streets of France with, or to conjure butterflies. Your choice. I hope you liked this video. For more upcoming content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and click the little notifications bell. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and if you want to support my work, you can always get me a cup of coffee. All links are in the description below. Bye bye!